Thank you everybody for coming. You all look really nice, actually, which isn't how I imagined you all. I imagined you looking quite like that in my mind when I was thinking about this talk, so thanks for looking nice. I thought I'd start with a poem. And this poem, I think for me it sort of evokes it's not really about ethics, but it kind of evokes a feeling of what I think ethics feels like or something, but I'll just read it. So, it's kind of like an ethical life, or a dream of an ethical life. It's called Daydream. One day people will touch and talk, perhaps easily, and loving will be natural as breathing and warm as sunlight, and people will untie themselves as string is unknotted, unfold and yawn and stretch and spread their fingers, unfurl, uncurl, like seaweed return to the sea, and work will be simple and swift as a seagull flying, and play will be casual and quiet as a seagull settling, and the clocks will stop and no one will wonder or care or notice, and people will smile without reason, even in winter, even in the rain. So I like this poem, I like this image of unfurling and uncurling like seaweed return to the sea. This to me is the kind of the movement of ethics. I'm just trying to emphasise, I think, in this talk, that it's a natural movement, something that we long for and that we want. I think for me this poem it's called Daydream. It is kind of it feels like something I want. I want people to be stretching and yawning and smiling, and it's a bit cheesy, but it's good. It's good cheese. So I listened to a talk by Subhadra Mati, who wrote this book called Not About Being Good, and which you can buy, I think I'm required to say, in the bookshop. And she said in the talk, I haven't read the book, but I listened to the talk, and she said in her talk that if there's one thing that you should remember from her talk, it is that, well, she quoted Bante as saying that to be ethical is to be human, and to be human is to be ethical. I think it's that way around. Yeah. So she was emphasising again that kind of, it's not about being good, or a kind of, I think for some people, maybe the word ethics can have connotations with and needing to kind of limit yourself, or kind of, she uses the image of a castrated dog padding around the living room, just kind of trying desperately to be good. So I don't want to offend any pet owners who have castrated their animals, but but that is the image, and I thought that was a good image of like what it's not. To be ethical isn't to kind of limit yourself, it's related to freedom. It's kind of an untying of yourselves as string is unknotted. I like that. So it's not the dog padding around the living room to be ethical. So what is it? It's something else. But so what I'm trying to say is that, so this kind of split between good and bad is quite it's a classic tendency of the human psyche to kind of split into good and bad and black and white, and to create that. So that's natural and kind of on one level a normal way that the mind operates in order to try to create to make sense basically out of experience. Like, I am a good person, or I am a bad person, or my life is good or my life is bad. These are the kind of the headlines of experience. They can be like that at times. And I noticed that in my life, still to this very day, this kind of swinging from, if I am good, I can stay in control of my life, and I will be, if I just drink lots of smoothies and practice ethics even, I will be able to maintain a sense of goodness, and it will be clear and secure, which obviously inevitably swings into, I'm going to say a swear word. Fuck it. I know this is a talk on ethics, but I just want to swear once, because it's not, I felt like it had to be that, because it is that. So it swings into that, the effort mode of, I can't control anything, and I'm just going to be bad, and that's the kind of, they come together really. So that's the way that I notice I still operate in, hopefully more and more subtly, and more kind of aware of that formulation of my experience, which is based on the desire to kind of want to be something, so to be good or bad. But ethics is about reality, it's about actually engaging with what's actually happening. And if you do start to meditate and engage with what's happening, or just become more aware in your life, I think we'll find, or I definitely find, that things aren't black and white. There's much more grey area, and ethics is about engaging with that grey area and day to day. I said that to Amala Siddhi, and he was saying, who's my partner, and he said, it's not really grey area though, because it's not grey. It's like, when you do get in contact with the grey area, it's multicoloured, and it is light. So to call it the grey area is to assume that it's in the darkness, or that it's a bit drab, but actually get in contact with the subtleties and the less crude storylines of life. We'll find that a variety of colours. Thought I'd do an example. I'm not going to use my notes. So tempting. So my example is of, I just thought I'd use an example of a time when it can feel really not appropriate to be ethical, or in my mind it feels really difficult to be ethical, or like just a hard time, or a time when I'm definitely really wrapped up in the storyline. And so my example is kind of late at night, having had an argument with someone, just anybody, having had an argument. So it's definitely important that it's kind of dark, and everything feels like an ending. Everything feels like bad, and like the mode now needs to be the effort mode of. Well, my kind of thoughts is that I'd like to. I was talking to Sarah about this the other day, but I'd like to kind of just live in a cave, cry for the rest of my life, and punish him or her for the rest of my life. Just punish the person in question. But this is definitely a repetition. Like, I'd argue with my mum, and I was growing up, and I'd run upstairs, slam the door. It'd be me and my Bramble Brown, my teddy bear, and it felt like it was just us against the world. And if I could, it felt like the necessary action would be to go and take my teddy bear to a cave, run away. But I've noticed in that time, which does happen, there is a way in which I have been noticing that I can reconnect with ethics, even at such a kind of strong time, basically. Yeah. So I think even if it's just a voice saying, maybe this isn't the whole story, maybe you're wrong, or just a kind of subtle, maybe, there's kind of like maybe you should just fall asleep at this moment, so, and then see what it's like in the morning, that kind of thing. That is an ethical movement, I think, for me, the kind of a connection with potentially this storyline is not the whole thing, and what you want to do, the destructive move, might not 100% be, I need to be really gentle though, may not be totally accurate. I get your point, it would be saying, but maybe try, just for a moment, just falling asleep or something. So there we go. That's an ethical movement. That's a reconnection with, a movement away from the headlines. I thought it was good I'd like to emphasise also that in that moment it's kind of quite a conscious thing, just to kind of, oh, what about ethics? Aren't you supposed to be practicing ethics? Doesn't feel quite good. And I think that's a good thing about having an ethical practice, is that you don't always have to be inspired to practice. You can act as if, and kind of, even if it feels a bit wooden, sometimes just consciously bring in reflection on ethics, even if you're not kind of in contact with the vision or the kind of sense of connection to all life, and or even a lesser degree of that. So I think that's important for me to know that I don't always have to be inspired to practice ethics. An example of that recently was just realising that Gina, who I live with, gets rejoiced in a lot for being really generous. She's a very generous being. And I just sort of had the reflection of, or just a conscious kind of benign thought of, oh, you don't really get rejoiced in for being generous, do you, Hannah? And that wasn't like being myself up or anything, it was just that's not really something I do. And then I think because I've got this practice of ethics, I thought, well, I could experiment with being a bit generous, even if maybe it's not my most natural quality. So I think I have been trying to look out for ways of being a bit more Gina-esque. Not totally, but just a little bit more, just, yeah. Like when we were on a festival together, I know that Gina doesn't drink water very regularly, so I was offering her water. I was like, yes, being ethical. I know we were talking about generosity last week. I think it's important that we can practice ethics even when we're not feeling inspired. Because I think for me, for a lot of the time, I do feel relatively lost, or I think if I connect with at 10 o'clock in the morning, I may just, if I actually connect with how I feel, I don't feel like, yes, I definitely know what I'm doing and I know what the next move is. And I think my guess is that in general humanity is lost. And my guess is that is just part of being human, the sense of being lost. So I appreciate that the Buddha gave us a set of guidelines so that we can keep on engaging with our life even when basically we don't know what we're doing. So it's quite broad, and maybe some of you do know what you're doing, but I'm just, for the purpose of me speaking right now, you don't know what you're doing. None of you know. And I think, because the Buddha really understood that the forces of greed, hatred and delusion are really, really, really strong, really, really, really convincing, and really, really, just like, I can just go for ages and be totally convinced about the way I am and the way that I think about things and the way I act, and not even have a moment sometimes of being able to see that or have a light shone on that. So I think it's great that we can act ethically when we feel the vision to do so, and we can also try out ethics when we don't feel the need to do so. But then also, my other point is that when we do get the vision, I'm going to do an example so this will make sense in a second. That when we do get the vision and realise, oh God, I've been living out of greed, hatred or delusion, or all three probably, then that's okay, that's normal. And my example is that when I went on my first retreat, which is often a time for remorse, I find, or like Satchiprara was saying in meditation, and well, especially in retreat, you can kind of come into contact with just deeper, just what's been going on. So on my first retreat, I was called Ethics to Insight, and I was 19. I'd been living at uni, and I just finished uni, and I'd been living with a woman for 2 years, and I realised on this retreat that I just kind of realised how I'd been basically passively, aggressively behaving towards her, if that's a verb, but just not being a friend for at least a year of that time living together. And it just kind of came out in the light of how I definitely hadn't just been avoiding her, like just like that, for a year. And that's a lot, because you live together, you brush your teeth together, you say goodnight. There's a lot of time was spent on that. There was a lot of time that I felt in a way caught. It's not that I actively thought I was doing good, it's just that I wasn't conscious to some degree of how that was playing out. So that was great that I was on retreat, so I wrote her a letter and I said I'm sorry, and I owned it, and it was, I was unable to own what I could own, but also forgive myself as well, let it go afterwards, I think. So I wrote that letter, and she did write a letter back, and she was like, yeah, you were. That was pretty shit. And it did change. Like, we're not as sort of close, but we're, there's not that kind of unsaid experience between us. I think that's the Buddha really encouraged that it's really important to, when you do realise or do come into light around ethical behaviour, that it's not too late. So I think I appreciate that there is an element of it's not too late. Where possible, on the whole, you can go back, reconnect, or whatever it is. It's not too late. And on that, I think it's just great. I found it so valuable to be able to actively forgive myself and to be able to believe myself when I say I forgive myself. So I think that's a good one to try out at home, actually, if you can try out what it feels like to really say I forgive myself around something, a particular area, or just general, like maybe you don't forgive yourself for generally living and just going about your day. Sometimes there can be just general guilt about nothing. So I appreciated that. So I'm nearly at the end of my talk. No. I've definitely missed out so much, but if you just give me a moment. I feel like I'm just reiterating a point of that. If I was left to my own devices without ethics, I think I would be even more. It's hard to say what in an alternative parallel universe what it would be like, but I feel like I would be lost. And I just feel like, really, really grateful to the Buddha for giving me a way to actually function in reality and to kind of be able to participate in my experience and to be able to let things go when necessary and own other things and be responsible for other things when necessary as well. So I think, I just wanted to end on gratitude to the Buddha for giving us some guidelines for how to function. And I think that's kind of really key for me, because I have had in the past experience of like why Buddhism, you know, why Buddhism as opposed to like beautiful poetry or kind of people that have had insight in the past, like artists. And for me it's like Shakespeare. He had as much insight for me to some degree on the nature of reality as the Buddha perhaps, but it was kind of really realising that no, I couldn't function just by reading Shakespeare. Like I could, like to some degree I'd be reconnecting with beauty and love, but this ability to actually, what he gives us is a way of functioning in that experience and not becoming, being able to integrate that. So, and ethics is so key for that. And in a way we can only really think about what our next step will be, and that's good because it's not too overwhelming. I think that's my talk. Oh, sorry, we can clap. So these are the precepts, which I haven't mentioned because I didn't really feel like it, but this is basically the 5 precepts.